And we are live. Attendees should be able to join shortly. And I will. We have Angel Schnur and Lara Biggs. Oh, and Joanne is here as well.
All right. All right.
Okay. So Chair Revelle, before we start, I was just going to read the name of the participants that are here as requested by the public.
Sure.
We currently have one attendee, Duncan Anu.
Okay. And signed up to do public comment or anything or not?
No.
Okay. Okay.
We do not have anyone signed up in advance for public comment. If anyone is looking to do public comment at either of the two public comment period, either on the draft action plan and amended citizen participation plan at the beginning of the meeting, or just regular public comment at the end of the meeting, they can raise their hand and we'll be able to speak.
Right. Okay, great. Well, we have a quorum, so I'm going to call us to order. I called the meeting, the December 14th, 2021 meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee to order. And first order of business is, of course, to ask someone to move suspension of the rules to allow us to participate electronically or by phone. Can someone make that motion?
I move to suspend the rules so that we can participate electronically or by phone.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Okay. And do we have to take a roll call for that?
Yes.
Okay. Miriam.
Chair Revelle?
Aye.
Lauren Berlin?
Here. Aye.
Kathy Feingold?
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez?
Aye.
Joanne Zolomich?
Aye.
And the motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And we, three of our committee members, Burns, Newsma, and Reed, got double booked today. So they'll be joining us late. They're currently at a budget and finance committee meeting. So we have a quorum though, so we'll get started and welcome their presence when they can show up. So the first item of business then is approval of the minutes of our November 16th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve those, please?
I move that we approve the minutes of November 16th.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Okay, and were there any comments or corrections? Does it have to be a roll call? Or can we do?
Yeah.
Okay, Marion, thank you, please.
Chair Revelle?
Aye.
Lauren Berlin?
Aye.
Kathy Feingold?
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez?
Aye.
Joanne Zolomich?
Aye. Salome.
Thank you. The motion passes 5-0.
Okay. All right. Well, now we can get into the meat of our meeting. And so we have several items related to the 2022 draft action plan. And the first thing we're going to do is ask if there's any public input on the 2022 draft action plan and the amended citizen participation plan. And I understand, Sarah, that someone did submit a comment.
Yes. Do you have that to read?
Yes. Yeah, I can read that. Jane Grover submitted a comment. She saw the city's notice about comments on the citizen participation plan, and she sent a note that it should be called a public participation plan or a community participation plan, as not all those who would participate are citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Residents could be part of it, notwithstanding their citizenship status. There's an equity angle on this.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we wanted to share is that the citizen participation plan is named as such based on HUD regulation. However, when we call for public comment, we always mention public comment being requested on the citizen participation plan, just to ensure that the whole community is included. We unfortunately cannot change the name of the actual plan.
Right, okay. So have we relayed that concern though to HUD?
It will get submitted. When the action plan is submitted, the actual email will be attached, and we will write a little summary
Okay,
and point out that we always try to get beyond the term citizen in a nice way.
okay, right.
And then do you all respond to her as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we responded to her by email. Yes.
Great.
Right,
Great.
okay.
Absolutely. Yes, and we have, I mean, it is a comment that there's this funny thing that it says, do you accept or not accept? If you don't accept a comment, then you have to say so. So we are accepting this by responding and including it.
Okay, right. All righty. So no one has showed up yet in the waiting room to offer any.
No one has raised their hand to provide any comments.
Okay, so then I think we are set to move on. We close this?
Yes, actually, we should close the public comment period because there has been no more input, and we want to close it before we have the committee debate and make any votes. So,
Okay, so, and that takes a motion?
well, it doesn't hurt. I don't think we've always done it, but I think it would be a good thing to do it.
So would
I
someone?
motion to close the public comment period on the Citizens Action Plan.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, then Marion, would you take a roll call, please?
Chair Revelle,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zalomi.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
All right, so we've officially closed our public hearing then.
Yes.
So then now we move on to discussion and vote on the draft action plan allocations by goal based on estimated grant amounts. And I think to just get us started officially to be able to discuss this, if someone would move approval of the 2022 CDBG home and ESG allocations by goals based on grant estimates. Somebody just wants to say so move.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so now we're officially ready to discuss this item, and I don't know, Sarah, is there anything you want to say by way of presentation or?
We did go over at our last meeting how we arrived at these and explained how we arrived at them. And just to reiterate, one of the, we do use a percentage of funding that historically has been, allocated to these goals based on the priorities of our 5-year consolidated plan. And we do our allocations in this draft action plan by goal because, as you can see, the goals are fairly large sums of money. And if we make some changes, we do not affect the percentage enough to trigger yet another 30-day comment period. Depending on when we get our grant amounts, sometimes we can push our ability to get access to our funds even later in the year, because we have to, once we get our grant amounts, we will come back to the committee with recommendations on any changes based on the grant amounts and get approval. And then that has to go to City Council for approval. Then it has to go to HUD, and HUD has up to 45 days to approve before we get release of our funds. So this is why we normally get release of our funds sometime in August or September. So we're trying to make it not any later than that. We also have in our citizen participation plan, which is where the what constitutes a substantial amendment is defined that if even, the definition is if certain goals change by more than 20% because the grants account for that. And this only really applies to the administration goal, because each grant has a set amount of money that can be for administration. With CDBG, it can't exceed 20%. With home, it can't exceed 10%. With ESG, it can't exceed 7.5. So know that that's just rounded, because otherwise, if we have all those little percentage points, it's up. But that doesn't constitute a substantial amendment, because that's something outside of our control. So anyway, and of course, these do align with the priorities in the con plan. That's how the spending priorities are determined.
Right.
But it gives us a great deal of flexibility to fund individual activities and projects later when we get our final grant amount, and that's key.
So I had one question.
Sure.
I mean, we can ask about any part of the plan, right? We're not in a specific.
Mhm.
Okay. So the only question I had, I mean, I didn't have any objections to anything in it. But in terms of timing, I noticed on the funding for nonprofits, the suggestion was made to hold off on issuing the RFP until we see the funding. I was just curious, if you don't get the funds until August or September and you issue the RFP, then we would still be able to disperse it during 2022?
Yes, actually,
timing on that.
Actually, we don't want to do an RFP till we get our final grant amount, not necessarily get access.
Not the funds. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes a lot more
And
sense.
and
Yeah.
because those categories do not require that it be expended in the same year, CDBG has an overall grant expenditure deadline of 8 years, but administration and public services have to be spent in the grant year they are awarded.
Got
And
it.
it's just like, yeah, but that's a good question. One of the things we have found is when we have done applications on estimated grant amounts, we find that we get the nonprofits trying to make estimates and get bids from which to make their estimates of their costs, way in advance of when they actually start the project. And given what's happening with construction costs these days,
Yeah, the timing's important.
it just goes crazy. And we also know that we have to sit everybody down and say, okay, remember all the rules, Davis-Bacon and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And we are talking about, and we'll get into this at a later meeting, actually looking at flipping out CDBG that we would use for our external agencies with ARPA, which is a more flexible funding source and does not require Davis-Bacon. And we don't normally have this advantage, but we have lots of things that we're talking about in ARPA that are also CDBG eligible, and any of the city infrastructure projects already require us to pay prevailing wage. And go through
that
all
in the plan that use
Yeah.
CDBG first where possible so that you can meet the Davis-Bacon requirements.
Yeah.
Makes
It's a
sense.
real
Makes
pain in the
total-
neck, so.
Yeah, I can imagine. That makes good sense.
Yeah, and
So that was
many
my only
contractors,
question.
Oh,
Sorry,
many
yeah.
contractors for small jobs don't even want to bid with prevailing wage, because normally their workers aren't, if it's like they mostly do residential contracting, they don't want to have to pay their workers prevailing wage for one small job and then bump them back to, it's just, it's really, it's quite a headache.
Yeah. I can totally see that.
Yeah.
Well, has the share of those funds for city projects always been a lot higher than what goes to nonprofits?
Yes, it has been. Mhm.
Okay. Just for clarification with all our little lines on the affordable housing goal under housing and rehabilitation,
Mhm.
N and RL stand for? Where it says
EN is entitlement funding. In other words, that's new money from the 2022 grant. Sorry about that. We shouldn't be speaking in code. And RL is revolving loan payments. So
I wondered that too, Joanne. I wondered that too.
sorry about that. We should say what our, and it's even worse because the RL is what is counted in the formula as program income. Our revolving loan fund is a subcategory of program income. It's when you get money back on CDBG investments and you specify it for a specific use. And the reason we have had a revolving loan fund for the CDBG program since it started in the 70s. And for the most part, it has enabled us to keep our program going with relatively low entitlement allocations each year, which has been important, especially as our grant amounts have gone down, certainly relative to the cost of inflation and everything. I mean, we had grants of over 2 million back in the 90s, and so it's and even before that. So the actual the real value of the entitlement grants has gone down substantially over the years. And the one thing that we are working on is we would like to look to make our CDBG projects done with forgivable loans, if we can get to that point, because one of the things that we then do is we help our lower income residents actually build wealth and equity, equity and intergenerational opportunity for intergenerational wealth. But then we have to figure that we have enough other sources to keep the program going. So that's what we're working on.
Can you give examples of what the nonprofits have used their money for?
Sure. We actually had CJE down on Howard Street that has their facility with where they have their senior program for their memory day program for seniors with memory challenges. It's we have done some enhancements to their security and things like that. At one point we helped them put in better doors and a notification system so that if somebody tried to get out, they would be notified and they could make sure it was a safety feature. Actually, CJE had an application and was awarded $20,000 in 2020, and they will be coming back to make an application because they gave back that $20,000 and said, we can't do our project until the Anne Rainey apartments are completed because we're not going to be building at the same time. And so they said, we will wait and come back later. And that allowed us to use that, that money for something else. So they will be coming back. 2 years ago, we helped the Infant Welfare Society build out a play area, a indoor play area, gross motor skills area, and just, enlarge and enhance their facility. And that was really important because they were unable to really give children in their care enough space for gross motor activities, which were very important to developmental when the weather was bad, and they wanted to be able to have them both outdoors when the weather was good, but also give them stuff when they were indoors. Over the years, not recently, since because of the changes in ownership of the family focused building and the question about whether it was going to be sold, we had put significant dollars over the years into that building, including redoing the gym floor, actually providing, doing new lighting for both energy efficiency and just, better lighting in the building overall, tuck pointing, stuff like that. Basically a lot of CDBG is used for deferred maintenance or just things that are really hard for a nonprofit to raise money for. It's not like you're going to do a capital campaign for some of this stuff. And because dollars have been so short that they've been really squeezed. The old YWCA shelter had over a number of years, had improvements, including upgrades to its electrical, so it met code, and also many years ago, a lift, and then later, when the lift ran into trouble, a ramp for accessibility. So it can be a whole range of things, but we have not done any major, our overall CDBG is not enough to really help with, like, if somebody wanted to acquire a building or something like that, we just don't have that kind of capacity. And nobody's asked us for that. We did also contribute to the YOU building, both their old building when they were still across from, rehabs and stuff, when they were across from the middle school, and their new building, we actually put money into the construction of that. So a lot of different things.
A lot of things, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugo, did you have a question? No. Okay. Any
No,
other?
thank you. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this part of our agenda? Then I think we are ready to vote on the motion to approve the 2022 CDBG home and ESG allocations by goals based on grant estimates.
And I will take the roll call.
Yes.
Chair Revelle,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Sorry, I was muted. My kids are taking showers upstairs and I didn't want you guys to hear it. Sorry. Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Ugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolami,
Aye.
and the motion passes 5-0.
Great. Okay. So now we can move on to talking about some of the specific programs and projects. So I guess I'm going to hold off on asking for a motion because I think we need to discuss the actual amounts. But basically, we're going to be looking at approving the 2022 City of Evanston programs and projects based on estimated 2022 CDBG grant amounts. And I know we have some staff here to talk about some of those specific programs. And the first one's code enforcement. So Angel, would you like to say a few words to us about that program?
Sure. So we have had 4 property maintenance inspectors and myself. In 2022, we are getting a 5th inspector. So we'll be able to focus more on the routine inspections of rental properties. In the past, it's been difficult for us to keep up on top of those routine inspections because we haven't had a full staff of inspectors, and hopefully this year we'll be able to get back to those after doing remote inspections and video inspections for COVID. So we'll be able to move back into that. So those inspections are done in CDBG areas and non-CDBG areas, but we do the CDBG rotations a little bit more frequently. And then the inspectors also respond to any complaints for rental properties. And then notices are issued to the owners. We give them time to correct the violations and conduct re-inspections. And if necessary, bring them to administrative hearings.
Great. So that's all this, the funding is really for staffing then.
Mhm.
Okay.
It can be used, just one other thing, it can be used for some things, like, for example, when we, the last time we invested in the current database, which is not meeting our needs, we can, if we have the capacity with our CDBG, we can use some of our CDBG funding on a pro rata share to help with those expenses as well, which can be important.
Okay. Committee members, any other comments or questions about the code enforcement piece? Then I see we have Rob Anthony. Rob, are you here to talk about the housing rehab program?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I apologize. I had another meeting and I just left that meeting, so I apologize for coming on late. I know that Sarah primarily manages or helps manage the application process for the OOR, and so our role that we just started doing earlier this year is helping to manage the construction side and the construction management. In addition to that, we are able to leverage some other programs that we got funded through the Illinois Housing Development Authority, so that we can use some of those funds for home accessibility improvements and other owner-occupied rehab improvements, as well as the city's dollars allocated towards it.
Right.
And that is part of what I was talking about, how one of the things that owner-occupied rehab money that Rob and SEPA secured through IDA is limited to owner-occupied housing. Plus, it has some limitations even that way that annoys both Rob and me, one of which is that if a property is in a trust, the IDA money can't be used. So what we do is we look at what is the best source of our funding. Is it CDBG or is it the owner-occupied rehab money? And if we can build more and diverse sources, it will also make it possible for us to do the other goal that I was talking about, which is to get to the point where all of our loans are done as forgivable. IDA loans are done as forgivable loans. The maximum amount of money that can be used for the owner-occupied program is $40,000, and it has a 10-year period of over which it's forgiven. And I don't recall the specifics of the accessibility grant, Rob, but it's similar to that, if I recall. And so
5 years for accessibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we, SEPA and city staff agree that if we can get to the point where we can do forgivable loans, so we maintain affordability and owner occupancy for a while, that's good. But we also take the burden of having to repay off. So.
Welcome, Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, guys. Are you in the middle of it here, or?
We are at item 5B.
Okay, I thought it was.
We were told that the meeting was holding off until 7:30.
Yeah.
Well, we went ahead.
All right, 5B.
5B. So we're talking
Catching up.
about the approving the 2022 City of Evanston programs and projects based on the estimated 2022 CDBG grant amounts, and that would be the $325,000 for code enforcement. Right now, we're talking about the funding for housing rehabilitation, and we have Rob Anthony from SEPA here. So I don't know, committee members, do you have any questions or comments about the housing rehab portion here? Then I think Laura Biggs, we have you here to talk to us about alley improvements.
Yes. So alley paving is basically we go into an alley that is deteriorated or has been unimproved, and we install a drainage system. We put in a concrete base and then create this smooth riding surface for the alley. It's becoming standard that we also install speed humps into the alley when we do these projects. So there's a lot of benefits to the alley paving project. It decreases wear and tear on vehicles, which includes both owner cars, but also the city's garbage trucks. And it improves flooding situations in general. On an unimproved alley, the gravel, or we use a lot of times we use asphalt grindings from repaving projects. They become so compacted that basically there's no water that's percolating into the earth from the alley. And over time, they raise up higher than the yards as we go in and refresh them with additional grindings and smooth them out. And so you get a situation where the yards essentially become bordered by the alley, and any rain falling on the alley just sloughs off into the yards. So it increases stormwater issues on private property over time. And then in an unimproved alley, you frequently get into a situation in the winter where if people have garages off the alley, because they can't really do good snow removal, they start losing the ability to access the garage, particularly the doors tend to ice shut, and it becomes a common problem. The only other pathway to improving an alley, or the standard pathway to improving an alley in the city of Evanston, is a 50-50 special assessment, where the city pays 50% of the cost of the alley, and the homeowners or the adjacent property owners are expected to pay their share of the other 50% of the cost. And therefore it is a barrier for people of low income means in order to be able to participate in this kind of improvement, which can make a huge difference in the quality of life and how you access your property.
Yeah.
So I should say this particular alley, we have 4 wards that are in CDBG areas, and we typically rotate between the wards in a cycle, so that we do one alley from this ward and then we'll do an alley from a different ward and so on. And so this year it's a 5th ward alley, and we worked with Councilmember Burns to select one that has been problematic. And so that is the alley north of Emerson, east of Hartree. And the cost of that project is $390,000. Because of the way alley improvements works, this is sort of funding like all or nothing. Either fund it or don't fund it, but don't give us partial funding because you can't partially build an alley.
Yes, Ugo.
I have a quick question on that, and it is that if the way that the city handles alley paving in other communities where the residents are able to pay the 50%, why is it that the city is not covering 50% of the cost of repaving that alley, and these funds are paying for the entire project? Is there a particular reason for that? Because if the funds cover 50%, that will be the part of the residents that are not able. I totally get that, but I don't understand why is the city relying on, and I heard you saying that the city won't take partial funding, but why is that?
It's purely lack of funding devoted to alleys. We actually, in our normal 50-50 program, the city funds $250,000 a year for the city's share, which allows us usually to only do one alley per year. This year, it kind of worked out that we had not as much spent previous years, so we had built up a balance of general obligation bonds, so we're spending it down and we're building 2 alleys. But the process for getting an alley done through the normal special assessment program is really onerous, and yet we have a tremendous demand. So right now there are over 30 alley locations that are waiting for petitions on a wait list. And we typically only release maybe 5 petitions a year at most, depending on how many actually get signed. Where a majority of the homeowners sign the petition, then we go into building the alley. But we currently think the backlog is at least 6 to 10 years, depending on how many people successfully get signatures and the special assessment gets voted in. So we talked with City Council about increasing funding, not recently, but in the past, and that program has so much demand that it's really difficult to tell the people who've been waiting on the program already for 4 or 5 years that we would delay their alley further.
Yeah.
I will
And that-
also,
Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say unsolicited endorsement here. When my family moved here almost 7 years ago, we didn't have our alley paved, and our neighborhood eventually did the 50-50 program. And it made a huge difference in our neighborhood. Our street is full of young kids who run behind the houses, and the speed bumps slowed things down. It just made everything a lot better. So for what it's worth, you know.
Another point that I just wanted to make that most of the committee members are not familiar with is we have money also that we're not asking for renewal because we haven't used up the stuff that was allocated in prior year for alley special assessment assistance. When we do a 50-50 alley, we also send out information when their special assessments are finalized, because any household, an owner-occupied household, whose income is under 80% of the area median is eligible to have their assessment paid. And that also helps people who are in areas that generally where somebody has been unable to pay, and would vote against the approval. We've had in the past some areas where some people really want an alley paved and other people don't want the assessment. So we really try to balance and get those in between areas by covering the alley special assessment assistance, the assessments of the eligible people on those alleys through this assistance program.
And the assessment is prorate, like our neighborhood, it was controversial to do it for the cost too, but it was prorated over 10 years, I think.
Right.
It can be, yes. But if they're eligible, we pay the whole price because it But so it really does help. I do think that where it really helps, though, as Laura said, is the areas where you have lower income homeowners who simply are not going to vote for it.
But typically in a 50-50 alley project, the homeowner's share of the alley cost is around $6,000 to $12,000 per property, depending on the size of the properties and configuration of the alley. And so even for a person of moderate income to all of a sudden receive a $10,000 alley assessment bill can be really a lot. So we will give you a very low interest loan on your property tax bill, basically, so that you can prorate it, but it is a real barrier. However, it makes a huge difference in the quality of people's backyards and their properties to have this. And it allows, like I said, it makes a big difference in winter to allow people to even access their garages if they have them.
Right.
And the stormwater issue that you brought up, I think, has become even more important as we get, not this year, but in other recent years where we've had downpours and just enormous problems with flooding and it getting, and as Laura said, the alley gets higher and
Councilmember Burns has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to give a little background on how this particular alley was selected. So during the campaign, I canvassed all around the ward, and there were a few alleys that popped up that residents, kind of complained about in terms of the lack of resurfacing and drainage. There was an alley closer, in fact, to where I am on Simpson and Ashland, kind of just east of Simpson, but most of the properties that abut that alley are businesses. So we're working with them now, but I think they can, handle the special assessment process to pay to enter into the 50-50 program. There was another alley that we're actually working to get an easement, requesting an easement from ComEd, and that's kind of tied up in this ongoing franchise agreement negotiation. But that is kind of east of Darrow, between Lyons and Emerson. That was another alley that a lot of residents complained about. And I found out that alley is covered through an agreement that was forged after a settlement between the city and the waste transfer station off of Church Street. So there's a fund created through an agreement between the two organizations, and those funds are used to improve alleys in that area. And the next alley up happened to be that alley. So then that left the third one that came to my attention during the campaign, which was this one near Hartree. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context. And then I'm also looking for, obviously residents who are low income and can't afford the burden of the 50/50 program, but in addition, property damage. And so not only were they saying, the residents saying this was an issue that it's not resurfaced, not proper drainage, they're also experiencing property damage when we get these big storms. And of course, we know through climate that in our area, in Evanston, in the Midwest, that our issue with climate action resiliency really is going to come down to big storms and the water causing a lot of property damage. That really is what it's going to boil down to in our area. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of context on how this particular alley was selected.
Great, thank you. And Ugo, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I was muted. I have a barking dog in the background, so I had to mute myself. So just a quick comment on that, and it is that I totally understand that, one of the objectives of our committee is to create livable communities, and lives get enhanced tremendously by the existence of an alley. I traverse the city quite often, and sometimes through alleys to look a property from the alley side, and it is incredibly difficult. I definitely don't want to diminish that. My concern came from the fact that every dollar that we use for all of these projects is taken away from two of our other objectives, which are affordable housing and homelessness. So that is the only spirit that I had with my questioning of why is it that the city is not paying for the 50% on this particular alley or other similar ones. And I totally understand that, money is not easy to come by these days in particular. So I just wanted to make that comment, but it is troublesome that so much of our funds don't go to affordable housing and homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good comment. Any other comments about the alley improvement, or we can move on? Laura, are you going to talk to us about the sidewalk gap infill?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
So the city of Evanston this year, we historically only improved sidewalks through a 50/50 cost share program that's voluntary. So if there is a sidewalk that's deteriorated, the property owner is invited to participate into the 50/50 program. If they choose not to, then that sidewalk just gets a temporary asphalt patch. You can see these in every ward on every block of the city. And over time, we've really fallen behind. In addition, we also have a situation where there are locations where sidewalk does not exist on one or both sides of the road in some locations. And many of those locations are near what I would consider critical facilities for the community, such as schools or like the Erie Qualified Health Center or various other locations around town. So this the sidewalk gap issue has basically been unaddressed for quite some period of time. So we have a huge backlog over time that has developed of both sidewalk squares that need to be replaced and gaps where the sidewalk was never installed in the first place. And as we move forward, we're hearing more and more complaints and concerns about people who are mobility limited or who are in vulnerable populations, such as school children, who basically are ending up walking in the streets, particularly during bad weather, because there's no other option in order for them to traverse. So I'm combining two of these projects in the discussion because we are embarking on a different way of dealing with sidewalks, where citywide we have removed the 50/50 cost share, and the city will just fund sidewalk improvements. We've increased the funding in the 2022 budget. The city will cover the whole cost of it, but because there's such a large backlog, we are having to strategically spend our money. So we weren't going to spend it everywhere. We are starting in areas around schools and critical community facilities in order to deal with those areas first. And similarly with sidewalk gaps, we are looking at sidewalk gaps that are near those critical facilities. So we have put in two separate projects here. The first is a sidewalk gap project that is actually on Foster Street, across the street from Fleetwood Jourdain. In a 2-block area, there's basically two separate sidewalk gaps that exist. And we've had requests from community members before to fill these. We did not really have a program or a source of funding, but we are now starting to look at this. This is the only location, if it's approved, that we would construct in this first year. But in future years, we're working on design in other locations to be constructed in 2023. So this would be the first that we've done in a long time. And so basically the purpose of this project is the Sidewalk Gap Project on Foster is to infill the sidewalk that's missing. And simultaneously, because of the way streetlights work, we're also going to look in that 2-block area to see if there's any immediate need for streetlight improvements. When you're putting in additional streetlights, especially, you have to pour a concrete foundation and run conduit. So often that kind of interferes with the sidewalk. So we have an entirely separate streetlight modernization goal. And we would rather do that before we build new sidewalks. So we're doing that. As we do sidewalk gaps, we'll also do streetlights on those programs.
Wow.
So that is the first project. And then the second one is the sidewalk improvement program. That's just replacing deteriorated sidewalk squares. And we would begin doing that on the CDBG funding. We would start focusing on Simpson Street between Bridge Street and Green Bay Road, which is adjacent to Over the Rainbow, a community of people who are generally mobility limited and use Simpson Street to access Walgreens, which is at Green Bay Road, which is a primary source of medication and groceries and sundries.
Would
So-
Walgreens,
Hmm?
would Walgreens be putting any money in on that?
No, they are not. And per our new policy, we would not really even ask them. We're no longer will we be relying on anybody other than the city to fund sidewalks. Now, the exception being if there's a new development or a substantial renovation or rehabilitation of a property, then they are, according to updates in the city code, required to repair or replace the sidewalk while they do that as well.
Councilmember Nusma.
So this $200,000 for sidewalk improvements, this is CDBG money. There's additional money coming from other funding sources
Yes.
to do
Yes.
sidewalk replacements.
And the sidewalk improvement, so sidewalk gap that's the cost estimate we have to do the sidewalk gaps. Sidewalk improvement is completely scalable. If it's $75,000, we'll do $75,000 with the sidewalk. If it's $150,000, we would do $150,000 worth of sidewalk. However, separately, the city is also putting in $350,000 to do the general city sidewalks, and that we are focusing at areas around schools. That's our first target, to assist with the safety of school children walking to and from
CDBG
school.
money will be used for sidewalks in CDBG areas.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be in areas that have a primarily low and moderate income population,
And
as determined by the American Community Survey, which is those weird jumps around sometimes that
But
make us
the
all crazy.
other money will be used in other areas, or other money
yes,
will be used in these, in CDBG areas as well.
our single highest priority is citywide is schools and senior facilities. Because those are areas where the mobility limitations occur, or you have children who may not have the same judgment for protecting themselves appropriately as they are walking to and from school. They're just a more vulnerable population. However, the city has something like $12 million worth of backlog of sidewalk at this point that needs to be repaired, or where we have gap infills. And for that reason, the more money, the merrier. The Over the Rainbow is an example of a facility that has a vulnerable population. It's a very specific need. And were we to find that we had way more CDBG money than we were able to use on Simpson Street, we would simply start radiating out from Over the Rainbow and looking at the pathways of the people around Simpson Street to improve that.
So $350,000 of the $12 million backlog we're taking care of with CDBG funding for next year.
350 is by regular funding from the city and will go towards school and senior facilities. We're asking for, I'm sorry, it's 150,000. I forget exactly.
And actually, I just wanted to clarify one thing, because I can see there's a little bit of a confusion. Laura, you requested $157 for the sidewalk gap infill and $200,000 for the sidewalk improvement, and that those are the amounts that are listed on the agenda.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for that correction.
But
so both of those, the money will be spent only in CDBG areas.
How much other money is also being spent on sidewalks?
$350,000 from the general city funds, and then in the West Evanston TIF, we have also budgeted another, I think, 150,000. I'd have to look it up. But that again can only be spent in the area bounded by the West Evanston TIF. And most likely we are looking at focusing on Dodge Avenue sidewalks for that.
Okay. Thanks, Laura.
And just another clarification on the amounts. On the agenda, the amounts listed are the amounts that have been requested with the applications. On the memo, there's a recommendation that we provided as far as the level of funding for each of the projects, as an example, based on the CDBG grant amounts. So as an example for the sidewalk improvement, in the memo in the chart, what the recommendation that we provided was $75,000 out of the 200 for now. So that's just one clarification. You have the amount that was requested during the application, and then the amount that staff recommended based on the money available.
With the idea that if the grant amount turns out to be higher, then we could increase the funding for the sidewalk improvement program.
Yes, and one of the important things is, as Laura said, that is a very scalable program. And alley paving is not a scalable program. It's a do it or don't do it. And that the Foster stretch of infill is similar. It's like you've got to have it to really take care of it. So that's why staff is recommending that. That doesn't necessarily mean that's all we, here's hoping that the dollars are higher. Congress has now given themselves till February 18th when they extended the continuing resolution. So, we're always stuck with trying to deal with that.
Councilmember Burns.
I just want to say one of the conversations we've been having on the council is that I've been interested in for this coming up year, us having a work plan as a council, and so that we're on the same page with our committees, because I think this is a good example of how if we were more aligned, I think it would highlight how oftentimes the city uses a combination of funding, different funds to support its efforts, including sidewalk improvement, alley improvement, depending on where it is. And so even Ugo, to your point, there are other funds that we use to develop new affordable housing units, to do renovations. It's not just these funds, it's the Affordable Housing Fund, it's TIP funds. So I just wanted to underscore that point, that oftentimes what we're discussing today are eligible uses, not only for CDBG, but also some of them, if not all, for TIF. And so if it's in the TIF area, we can use TIF funds. If it's CDBG, then we can use CDBG. But I think for next year, we're going to certainly work to just be more coordinated in our efforts, so it's a little more straightforward for our committee members.
I do just want to point out one thing too, is when Laura and her team do the bidding, they combine all the different funding. So we've been getting amazingly effective bids in the years since that was done. At one point, CDBG was budgeted separately and was done as separate RFPs and stuff like that. And so that's been a huge way of getting greater efficiencies as well that I think has been really important to our ability to get more done.
Okay. And then Laura, are you also going to talk to us about the park picnic shelter electrical improvement piece?
Yes, this is a request that came through our Parks and Rec department. They offer summer programming at multiple shelters embedded in parks around the community. And this request refers to Butler and Twigs. In doing that, they have a need to have electricity on site available to run laptops and various other equipment they're using to support their programming. In some cases, it's STEM programming. So then it becomes very technology intensive, even though it's in an outdoor setting. So they have requested funding to start putting generally available electricity at some of the picnic shelters around town. So two of them are shown here at Butler and Twigs Park. This one is shown as a lower priority perhaps than say something like the alley improvement, because without this power, they utilize generators to provide electricity, which I'm not saying is an ideal solution. However, they have an alternate mechanism to provide the power, which is not to say that this isn't a perfectly valid project either. This is something that would be used to support community program for our summer camps.
And that could be scaled also by doing one or the one.
Yes, so we could do one picnic shelter. They're about 60 grand each. It has to do with like running a service and putting in new switches and electric box, and then a long conduit run of wire usually from the nearest service, because they're almost always really right in the middle of a park, not located to any power, close to any power lines. So it's so they are expensive to do, but we could do just one of them and it would be roughly 60 grand each, or we could do both of them.
And would they be ARPA eligible? Could we do ARPA funds for these, or?
They would be, because both of them are in an area where we could use them as equitable, inclusive communities. And of course, we haven't talked about how we can also say if we use replacement revenue, some things could be done, but that would be, so it would be eligible for that. And I don't think that is eligible for TIF because it's too far away. And I don't know that it's an eligible TIF expense, but I think that if we're lucky and have estimated low and we get a higher grant, then one of the things we end up doing is like, okay, what add-on projects do we do? And also, if we do go ahead with this flipping out the nonprofit money for this year with ARPA to help them avoid the complexities of Davis-Bacon, then all of that money from 2021 that hasn't been yet allocated and any other 2022 would all be then used up by the city in this 1 year, in this funding year. And again, that is simply trying to relieve our nonprofits of the burden of compliance that is difficult for them.
Yeah.
And I will state, in terms of the Davis-Bacon, the city of Evanston, by virtue of being a municipality, is required in the state of Illinois to comply with prevailing wage rates, which are different than Davis-Bacon wage rates, but they're not that different. And the city staff would fill out very similar documents, would require very similar things. You're, in a way, we're almost just trading one set of specifications for another set of specifications that are almost identical, except instead of saying prevailing wages, you say Davis-Bacon wages. So it's for the city, it's no issue at all to comply with Davis-Bacon wage rates, because actually prevailing wage rates are a little bit more onerous for us.
Yep.
So it's neither here nor there for us. We have to comply.
And Councilmember Burns, you have another comment?
Yeah, just wanted to add that another important part of electrifying these gazebos, and we have some examples of this already in the city, is these sites become places for all age groups to also sit and do homework in the summer, and they become kind of safe outdoor spaces for people to gather and work, especially people who don't have access to generators and other equipment. So I just want to underscore that there are other gazebos that have these outlets, and it will be great for the ongoing programming, which is a partnership between Northwestern, has a STEM program, and also the city of Evanston. But beyond that, they just become again gathering places for young folks, safe havens where they can do work with their computers and phones, and so I just wanted to add that. And then also, I think most of the more delicate components to it are, because they're covered, the wear and tear is probably not even the same. I mean, maybe, but probably not the same as, alley improvements and some of the sidewalk improvements we're talking about. So we'll get along. It's $120,000, but we'll get a lot of life out of them. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
The staff fully endorses any or all of these 4 projects and recognizes that not all of them will get funded, and really whatever the committee feels is the best use of the funding, city staff is totally okay with.
Right. Oh, yeah, so committee, the question to all of us is whether it's particularly for the item 5 and 6, the sidewalk improvement program, whether to approve recommending the full $200,000 or the partial funding of $75,000, and for the park and picnic shelter improvement program, whether to recommend the $120,000 or partial $60,000. So I entertain your thoughts on that score.
For a
So
dive.
that 729 listed does not include the park portion, right?
Which number was that?
Well, in the first paragraph under livable communities, there's the amount of 729,625, and just stating that doesn't include the park.
It does not, the way we've written it up right now. What we have recommended is $390,000 for the alley paving, $150,000 for the sidewalk gap infill on Foster, and then $75,000 toward the sidewalk improvement. I think the key thing is the alley paving is the one that there's no flexibility on, and actually same thing with the sidewalk gap infill. But also, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but the alley paving, it is helpful to have a commitment to that, because there's engineering and design, and Laura doesn't want to start on that if it's not going to be a project that is prioritized for funding, because then we're, not making wise use. I don't know if the sidewalk gap infill would have some of that same engineering and drawings and stuff, not to the same extent, but I'll let Laura weigh in on how much in advance she needs to do that. We want to be able to implement as much as we can, obviously, right away. And the sidewalk improvement, the square by square, and the picnic shelter improvements, as I understand it, do not take anywhere near the amount of engineering. And so one consideration would be to fund the things that do require that engineering and wait a little longer on the other things. We can always, I think we can, if the committee just doesn't want to make decisions completely at this point. And of course, it's always on estimate. So, you can always, as I say, the really important thing I think is for Laura and her team to be able to do any of the engineering things of the major projects.
Yes, Lauren.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what I was wondering is if we approve reduced funding on the ones that are scalable, sort of the parks and some of the sidewalk, what happens with the amount that was requested? So to keep it simple, you request 120, we say we'll give you, 60 for one gazebo, not two. Can we say, and let's put that other 60 into one of the housing related things we've discussed earlier, or is it sitting, what happens to the 60 we would not be approving?
I would not recommend switching it into another category at this point because this was posted as a draft with our percentages. You could do that I would wait until we see what our grant comes in. So whether we'd make any changes that would screw up our percent of funding before we do that. But we have that flexibility. The only categories that we can't increase other than by the percent of grant that it represents are administration and public services. And of course, the public services money goes to the Social Services Committee. But that is, those are the ones that we can't increase past whatever the actual grant percentage is. So public services is 15% of the grant year and prior year program income. And admin is 20% of the current year grant.
So then if these are our projections, so there's some flexibility anyways here in what's going to come out of it. But if we decide to fund, I'm just using the one gazebo because it's very discrete and a simple example. If we fund one gazebo and not two, the funds for gazebo number 2 are still earmarked to housing and community development in some capacity. And once as opposed to going into some sort of general use pot, they stay earmarked to our committees.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that's what
yes.
Okay. And also I apologize, I haven't been using the raise hand feature, but I will now that I will remember it exists.
That's a good question. Councilmember Reed.
Oh, I should have put my hand down because and I'm sorry, our new member, or somewhat new to me, our other member, I got clarifying answers from the last question. Thank you.
Okay, great. Councilmember Nusma.
How much money do we expect to have left over from this year that might be applied to next year?
We don't expect to have a lot. I mean, it's hard to say. We may have some carryover or unexpended on our alley paving. We're paving 2 alleys this year. So we will assess that, but we don't want to do it until we've actually closed them out. Most of the time when we reallocate funding from a year, that we would wait till we wouldn't reallocate 2021 in the 2022 year. We would allocate it for the 2023 year, depending on just how close we are to our margins. If we see we have more, then we'll come back and say that, we have this much more money. But again, what we then generally do is recommend that money stay in those categories, because if we change them and it changes the percentage of the 2020 or the 2021 action plan, then we again have to go through a substantial amendment. So, which is kind of a pain in the neck. It's not the end of the world, but we try to avoid doing it if we can, just because it's a lot of rigmarole.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Thanks.
So what are our thoughts? Do we want to, for those 2 items, do we want to approve the partial funding amounts for the sidewalk improvement and the gazebo, or the full, I need somebody to make a motion maybe.
I also want to point out there's nothing that says we have to hold back the 114,625 for nonprofits either, but we didn't want to. We again kept the percentage that was going to city projects versus non-city projects in proportion to the last 2 years. So,
all right, I'm just going to say what I'm thinking to give us a place to respond. I was really struck by Ugo's comment about the other two obligations around housing and homelessness and thinking about the magnitude of those problems in our community. I'm inclined personally to vote for partial funding on sidewalk and gazebo, and I would defer to other members who know those parts of the city better as to, or the city as to what we should prioritize within those options, like which gazebo or which set of sidewalk. That's my personal feeling. I'd like to just see where the numbers come in, and I understand that moving the money from the if it's really not an option to move the money from gazebos into something related directly to more affordable housing, then that might change it. But for me, but if there's some flexibility, I was very struck by that point. So everyone can tell me why I'm wrong. That's my thought.
No, if I can, sorry, if I can jump in.
Yes.
I am willing to support a part of that. I do think the sidewalks should be funded. Because as you know, I just want to put this in context. I understand. I agree with the point about affordable housing. I am someone who has been homeless. My family forced out of the city of Evanston because we couldn't afford to live here. So I understand at a deep personal level how necessary that is. But also, we want to realize that as we put people into this affordable housing, we want to have a neighborhood that they should be proud of to live in. And so we also have to keep up with the streets and the parks and all of the things that make that neighborhood a safe, clean place to live. The gazebos to me is not the most important thing. So I'm willing to support, paring down funding there. I think the sidewalks should move forward. I think I would suppose Councilmember Burns would also agree with that. I know we've spoken a lot about that. The rest of the funding makes sense to me.
Ugo, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Let me lower it. Thank you. My comment is that I feel that not given to both gazebos this year still allows us the opportunity to do it next year. So we do one this year and another one for 2023 action plan. And I also agree with Councilmember Reed in regards to the sidewalks. I walk my dog and we venture into different communities in Evanston, and it has always intrigued me why some areas don't have sidewalks, and some areas even feel like you're intruding, that you're trespassing private property when you're walking there. And many of these sidewalks or lack of sidewalks are areas very close to schools, like a block away or so. So I totally agree that sidewalks are very important. We are a city that respects very much accessibility for all of our residents. And I from that premise is that I say that we should award the entire request for the sidewalk program on both the repair or replacement and the gap infill of the sidewalks. That's just my opinion.
That's helpful. Kathy, we haven't heard from you yet.
Which is exactly why I'm speaking, which is I'm not really saying anything different than everybody else is saying. I just wanted to concur that, CDBG funding is so limited and flexible in so many ways. And I do agree with everyone that the sidewalk program is really important. Probably in my mind, more important than the gazebo, which I think is what some people are saying. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Joanne?
Yeah, I agree that the alley and the sidewalks are the most important and that we just hold off on the gazebo electricity and see if we do have some funds further down the road.
Councilmember Burns?
So I would definitely make a motion to at least do one of the gazebos. I think that's most of what I've heard today. And then the last comment, I'm not quite sure what the response was. I don't want to underscore, we shouldn't, it's important to understand that we live in a kind of an electronic world, especially with our young people. And however we can get them out of the home and outside into the community, I think is important. So I wouldn't, these two gazebos are already very heavily utilized. It could be even more if, with the right, with the ability to plug in. And so I think the question is, how do we get our young people outdoors, in our parks, outside? I think that's just as important as the sidewalks that they'll use to get there. So all this stuff is connected. I'm also just curious how the sidewalk program we're talking about, is it still Foster between Dewey and Jackson, or what area are we talking about again? What would be the partial, if it was funded partially, what would be cut out? This is what I'm trying to understand.
The sidewalk, so there's two line items. The sidewalk gap improvement is on Foster between Dewey and Jackson, and there's just a general sidewalk improvement, replacing of deteriorated squares. That is on, we would be focusing on Simpson Street between Bridge Street and Green Bay Road.
Okay, and so the one, we have some general support. I'm just trying to understand for the sidewalk, for the gap, to fill the gap basically on Foster.
Yeah, the gap, I think everybody's happy leaving the gap funding there. That would be 150,000. And the question is the sidewalk improvement program, which is either, the full funding would be 200,000 or the partial funding would be 75,000.
Okay.
One note,
That's the Simpson.
I just wanted to note that with the amount that we have in the livable communities goals of 729, 625, we actually could fund the sidewalk improvement the highest with that money. It would be 189,625. We couldn't do the full 200 because that isn't in that goal right now. We could certainly prioritize that, obviously, but that would be leaving nothing allocated for nonprofits. That's obviously a decision of the committee, but I just want to make clear that we can't quite get to the full, because we don't have quite $740,000 in this goal.
Right. And that calculation is based on funding just one of the park shelters.
No,
The 189,625 is what we have left when we fund the 390,000 alley paving, and the 150,000 for the sidewalk gap infill.
Right, okay.
And nothing for the parks?
Yeah, no, what it is if we fund the alley paving and the sidewalk gap infill, that leaves us 189,625 for any other uses in that category, which could be sidewalk, could be picnic shelters, or could be left unallocated for nonprofits. Or it could be hold and decide when we get the full grant amount, because those two projects don't require the same amount of timing to plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate, Laura, from your standpoint?
Yes.
So just to, sorry to be a little slow here. So for numbers one through 4, we're all fine. We've got the, we don't want to mess around with those allocations. So we're looking at number 5 and number 6, sidewalk improvement and the park picnic shelter thing. And for those two combined, we have up to $189,625.
Yes. Yes.
So
plus, sorry, for those two combined plus the nonprofit facilities potential money. Would it be helpful for me to put the chart on the screen? I don't.
Sure. I'll throw this out for the purposes of discussion.
sure.
Let's do fully fund the alley paving and the sidewalk gap. Let's do one park for $60,000 and put the balance in sidewalk improvements.
Mhm.
I like that.
Okay.
that would put 129,625 in sidewalk improvement and 60,000 into Parks Picnic Shelter.
And then 0 for the nonprofit, correct? Unallocated or nonprofit.
And this nonprofit, sorry to interrupt, it's exclusively for physical facilities repairs
Yes.
at their sites. And you know, since this committee is it's new, basically, historically, what is presented to the city, and you have mentioned a couple of instances, Sarah, on that scenario, but historically, what comes to the city or to the committee for requests for funds to repair facilities, and how critical it is to their service and their participants or the residents of the city?
It can vary quite a bit, but I think one of the challenges right now in our discussions with nonprofits, the organizations that have facilities, things that they're very interested in are the childcare centers that are the members of the Evanston Early Childhood Council. And they are the ones that have actually made an ARPA request. And they had a request for 300,000 for what they put as capital, but then their definition of what is capital is not always capital, because they said, oh, it's for things like if we had to get partitions and things like that for safety from COVID, and we need to recover from, you know, spending that money. Well, that would not be a CDBG eligible cost, because CDBG would say that is not a, you know, glued down,
Permanent
whatever it
improvement.
is, you know, it's not a true facilities improvement. It's a piece of equipment or something like that. And this is one of the nightmares that I see if we were to try to fund those childcare needs through CDBG this year. It would just be, I know you can't do that, but you can do that. And it really gets to be an annoying headache for everybody, and we really don't help people as much. I do think that we do have the CJE Senior Life, who we do expect to come back and ask for the improvement that it held taking the money on, and that was allocated at $20,000. So that's a really relatively minor thing. So that could be picked up almost. I mean, that, you know, we still have that unallocated money from 2021 of 159,766 that was held for nonprofits as well. So, you know, it's not like we don't have anything to provide for their needs. The only, in fact, the only application that was received and funded in 2020 was that one $20,000 capital needs. So we can really have very different applications from year to year. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, I have a lot of hands. Kathy?
Muted.
There we go.
Just so I understand from this chart, is the column on the right, because I can't see the top of it, is that the recommendation for allocation from staff?
Yes.
Okay. And then the oh, these glasses are terrible. The 114,625 in unallocated nonprofit facilities is basically because there's an unallocated, you know, had like line, basically, you can come back and utilize these funds for sidewalk improvement at a later date. You're
Yes, it
just
could-
sort of giving yourself an opportunity to see what comes up rather than, because I guess my concern is that taking the whole leftover amount after we do Well, we've already agreed on the alley paving and the sidewalk gaps. So on the other three, we agreed to do one gazebo. And then just allocating everything to the sidewalk improvement without having any in this sort of unallocated pile concerns me a little bit.
So one thing I could say that yes, you're, so the $114,000, that comes from basically looking at the amount that we have available under this goal, which is $729,625 minus the recommendation for the city project, and that leaves us 114. That can be combined with the 159 that's remaining from 2021 as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And yes, it has been put in this line as unallocated or nonprofit facilities, because while in the memo, we're talking about potentially going after ARPA funding for nonprofit because it would be more flexible. We don't know as of now if we're going to be able to get this money.
That could be a recommendation by the committee, however, because I think that that is something, this is an important function of this committee, is to look at our other much more deeply restricted funds and try to figure out the best way to fund projects from the different sources because of the complexity of the regulations.
Does that answer your question, Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it would be good. I don't know if 114,625 is the right number, but it would be good. I mean, I'm glad we have that 159 to fall back on. But I think we just don't know what priorities are going to come up. So I think it would be good to have some in the unallocated. That's just my my thought.
Councilmember Burns?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get a better understanding of kind of how and when money will come in and out of this, whatever fund we're discussing now. And so if I generally support NUSMA's recommendation. I don't think it was a motion yet, but if we didn't set whatever the dollar amount aside, when would additional funds come into this account or fund that we're discussing now?
Yeah, when is that the question is, when do we actually know the grant amount? I think.
Right.
Okay.
I wish I knew. That best guess right now is that Appropriations Acts will be approved by the end of the continuing resolution period, which is February 18th, 2022. HUD has then 45 days to release actual grant amounts. So February, March, early April would be my best guess.
Somebody help me. We're how many months away from that?
So
4 to 5.
Yeah, 4.5.
4 to 5.
Yeah.
So we're saying between that time period, we want some money in reserve in case we want to do something that we haven't figured out yet. Is that, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Correct.
We're saying 4 to 5 months, we may want to get something done, so we should set some money aside. And what are, quickly, and I know you went over this, I think you went over this, but what are the different, what are some of the eligible uses again? I know you said housing. Are we talking new affordable housing units? Are we talking rehab?
No, I think wasn't the,
We really are looking at keep not changing between the livable communities goal and other goals. The challenge is this, CDBG, we do not allocate for homeless under this goal because the homeless that we're talking about there is services. And so ESG is services, home is TBRA, CDBG actually could be used for homeless services, but when it is done, it comes out of the category in CDBG that's called public services. So we don't put it in, even if it, historically, we do fund both connections for the homeless and interfaith action with CDBG, but that's what the Social Services Committee did with the social services funding. We could do facilities improvements, and I have talked at considerable length with Betty Bogg about homeless facilities, but I honestly think that given we have this home ARP money that could be allocated for that, that's $1,298,000 and some odd change. And Cook County, the Cook County Homeless Alliance has been making significant requests for funding of homeless shelters, because we know that's a huge need to both the state and the county. So it's kind of hard to figure out what's the best source for that right now. But I do think that we have ARPA is a very appropriate source for that, in addition to the home ARP. So it's not like we don't have potential facilities funding for that.
And just real quick, just so I understand, so even if we held some money back, it would not be staff's recommendation to spend that money on homeless prevention services, but rather homeless shelters, facilities.
We can't spend any more than the $285,375, which is the estimated public services number for homeless services. Because
So
CDBG,
we're talking facilities. I just want to make sure I'm
Right.
understanding. So we're
right,
talking
right.
facilities.
So the
I guess
only
my thing
thing,
is, in the next 4 to 6 months, do we think that we would be ready to use this fund, this money to support a facility?
No.
Or is that for a long-term thing? And by then, February and March will hit and we'll have additional funds in. In addition to that, we have ARPA revenue and or ARPA funds and other funds that we can tap into. But right now, it seems like we have some good actionable items that we can
Correct.
use these funds for. And so that's
Correct.
my own thing, is I can see
Yes.
if there was something realistic that could happen in the next several months, but it doesn't seem like we really know what that is right now. And whatever it is, it would take some time. And by then we'd have additional revenue in, and a
Right.
much more than, $100,000 or so that we're talking about now.
and also we could, if something were to come up and it is in the $100,000 to $150,000 range, we could, the committee could allocate the 2021 unallocated public facilities for that as well. So we have that little cushion. So.
Okay, Lauren, I think you've been waiting to say something.
No, I think that conversation my understanding with Kathy's point was that we wanted a pool of money available if the nonprofits come up. So sort of to Councilmember Newsom's point, the idea being fund one gazebo, the balance on the sidewalks minus X amount of CDBG eligible needs from the nonprofit community that we anticipate in some form.
Let me
I don't,
rephrase
okay.
to address that point. 390 for the alley paving, 150 for sidewalk gap infill, 60,000 for the gazebo electric, and 100,000 for sidewalk improvements. Leaves us with, if my math is right, about 20,000
$29,625.
unallocated.
Yes.
So the question then becomes, I think that was Councilmember Burns's point, is something actionable gonna come up that we're holding that money for versus now? So I guess my question to the city engineer, and I apologize that I don't know your name, is if we hold that and then we say later we want to dump it in the sidewalk program, is that a meaningful amount of money to do something with? Does that help you in a significant way at that point? Or is it sort of like, oh, that 30,000 isn't that big a difference? I don't know this, when you said it's scalable, I don't know what the scalability is.
So it does help, and it's hard to know anymore what prices are going to be doing for anything.
Sure, yeah.
But essentially one sidewalk square is $250 to replace. I mean, it varies by like how wide a sidewalks is and stuff, but on average. So that's 4 sidewalk squares for $1,000. So you're talking about 120 sidewalk squares. I mean, spread out over several blocks, that can be a really meaningful difference to a community. So absolutely. And sidewalk is one of those things we will be doing for a very, I mean, even in the 50-50 program, we have always done sidewalk improvements. The program itself was the way it was for at least the last 40 years. Every year we funded some. So we'll be doing sidewalk improvements for a very long time.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we're coalescing around the question of if we want to keep 29.5 aside for, let's see what happens in February, and we can, if we don't need it, if we want, we can give it to nonprofits or to the sidewalks for CDGB eligible stuff for the nonprofits, or if we wanted, it doesn't sound like we can do another gazebo on that anyway, so we could put it in the sidewalks now or wait. That's what it sounds like to me, everyone is saying.
Yeah.
I will
Sarah-
second that motion if that's a motion.
So, Sarah, real quick, Sarah, I just want us to be all clear. The nonprofit is the facilities, right? Or is there some other use that I'm not aware of?
It's facilities. It's only
Right.
facilities.
That's what I
And-
want to be clear on to everybody. It's just facilities, unless there's something else. And so, again, I think we're just setting aside. It would be much, and I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that these sidewalks, I think, were selected with a lot of thought. Obviously, there's a lot of different sidewalk gaps and sidewalks that need to be improved in the city. You know, one is across the street from Fleetwood and Family Focus, and a school is going to be there. We hope soon, as far as what we're hearing from District 65. And so that sidewalk will help the students and young people kind of access that side of the street, and also people with mobility challenges. And I'm not sure exactly, I missed the beginning of this call, kind of what informed the decision, the Simpson Street decision for Laura. But I would imagine it's similar to me, where Over the Rainbow, which is a disabled apartment residence, they frequently use the street, unfortunately, because some of the sidewalks need improvement. They frequently are in the street because it's a much smoother ride for them as they go back and forth through Walgreens, which anybody who lives in that area knows that that's a common occurrence for them. That's essentially their shopping center, in a sense, their grocery store, because it's in close distance to where they live. So I just want to underscore that both of these sidewalk, these areas where there was a lot of thought that went into it. And so if there was some other use that was likely to happen between now and February or March, I'd understand, but it seems like there's nothing there, and that it would go a lot further for Laura and her team to know, hey, we got $29,000 extra that we could use to improve the sidewalk. So I'll leave it there.
Kathy?
No, I guess my question is, if nothing comes up, can that 29,000 be moved to the sidewalk improvement program?
It sounds like it, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Easily.
Okay, because I'm looking at that pot not necessarily as nonprofit facilities necessarily. I'm looking at it as unallocated, just a cushion in case something comes up. Because if you're right, if nothing comes up, then that's a great use.
Mhm.
The sidewalks is a great use
Yeah.
for those funds.
Sounds like.
And like we saw that we have 159 left over from this year. So, I mean, in a sense, we sort of have a cushion.
Mhm. Yeah.
I just think if you build up a little bit of cushion, then you can do more things.
Yeah. Lauren?
Okay, I'm gonna go back. I actually think, given that we already have a cushion, I would say we should fund one gazebo, balance to sidewalks. I understand Councilmember Burns' point that this has already been thought out. We have an identified need. And the other thing is that it's eligible under CDBG, which has these kind of strict and difficult requirements, and we have this cushion. So if we get more money in and we want to add more to sidewalks later, we can. I don't think, given that we have a cushion, that's how I feel. I don't think we need to hold it.
All right. Well then, Oh, sorry, Kat.
Wait just a minute. So Kathy, did I cut you off? Did you still have something to?
No, no, not at all.
Okay, to see her. Okay, Councilmember Reed.
Yes, so then with that, I think I'm hearing where we're landing. So I'm just going to go ahead and make the motion in line with Councilmember Nusma's and Miss Berlin. I think I just got your name. In line with the proposal there. So I move that we approve one gazebo, as Miss Berlin said, balance to sidewalks, and then funding the sidewalk as proposed.
As well,
Second.
as well as code enforcement, housing.
As well as, yes, as well as
Yes.
everything else, yes.
Is that motion clear enough?
Yes,
Can we
I'll just
can we
read,
say the dollar amounts real quick? Just so
I will
I'm
say the
clear.
dollar amounts
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
How many are your
for
dollars?
the livable communities. It would be 390,000 for the alley paving, 150,000 for the sidewalk gap infill, 129,625 for the sidewalk improvement, and 60,000 for the parks picnic shelter electric improvements. And so that would be one of the picnic shelters. And there would be no unallocated as of this estimate for 2022. But we know we have the 159 and some odd change from 2021. So we still have a cushion and an opportunity to use CDBG for eligible, other eligible uses, whether it's more sidewalk or whether it's for nonprofits that would be eligible under that. And then the amount for the other categories that we I think already went over and agreed to 200. Yeah, so we're fine on that. Okay.
So that's the motion. And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, and Joanne, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to hear specific numbers because so many have been thrown around. I
Oh,
was
I know.
lost there.
Oh, okay, sorry. Code enforcement is 325,000. Housing rehabilitation is 202,500. And that includes 100,000 of new 2022 entitlement money and the revolving loan repayments of 102,500. And I think, by the way, we have even gotten a little bit more of that in. So that we'll find out later. But again, that's a number that can change. And then the rest of it are the things we just discussed, the alley improvements and the sidewalk infill, sidewalk improvement and the picnic shelter.
Okay.
So the sidewalk improvement is now 129,625
Yes,
and 60,000 for the park shelter.
yes.
Okay.
Okay. Good discussion, everybody. So I think we're ready to have a roll call.
Chair Revelle,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolmi,
Aye.
and the motion passes 8-0.
Great, thank you. So we have two more items, but I think the next one is we're pretty ready to do, which is basically we need a motion to recommend the 2022 draft action plan and citizen participation plan to the city council following receipt of the 2022 final grant amounts. Would somebody like to make that motion?
So
I'll
moved.
make that motion.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you.
And before I take a roll call, Chair Revelle, would we be able to thank Rob Anthony, Larry Biggs, and Angel Schnur for joining and re-release them?
They are welcome to get back to their evening entertainment. Yes, thank you both for
Thank
being
you.
here. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take the vote for the approval of the action plan and citizen participation plan. Chair Rivell,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolami,
Aye.
motion passes 8-0.
Great, thank you. And then there was one other item in our packet that is ready for our approval, and that's the revised version of our rules and procedures for our committee. And if anybody has any, yes, Lauren.
So I noticed in the revisions that the packet removed some conflict of interest language. And I was curious to know where that came from, if I understood the revisions correctly.
Yes, we can explain that. It was a very specific thing that was carried over by accident from a committee that has not, well, a board that no longer ceases to exist. And it was additional, that was the mental health board. My guess is it had been carried since the mental health board was a standalone organization and had its own taxing levy and everything like that. There's been a lot of weird carryover stuff from that, but neither the Housing and Homeless Commission or the Housing and Community Development Act Committee had these administrative procedures and regulations format. So we grabbed the one that had been used by the mental health board, and it is actually the conflict of interest stuff is covered very thoroughly in the information, in the things that everybody, you all have to sign off on showing conflict of interest and things like that. So we just, we consulted with our legal department, and we're told best to just get it out. It's something that is not necessary. So yes, that is,
Okay.
but it is kind of like, what happened there?
Yeah, I
And-
was surprised.
Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about the revision?
I just want to say I appreciate that fine eye, Lauren, I believe that was Miss Berlin. So thank you.
And just a note, we will also recommend to the Social Services Committee, because it was picked up in that one too, that we remove it from that for consistency, and because it is not, it you know, it just, quite frankly, it was in the mental health board one, and there is no form that people filled out or anything like that. And having something like that that is not accomplishing anything and that we aren't complying with is a bad thing in our procedures.
Right. Because basically all boards and commissions are to comply with our Evanston City Code of Ethics. And
Exactly. And
I
so
don't-
that's,
yeah,
yes.
you know, other than affirming that, I think our Code of Ethics is pretty detailed and covers
Exactly.
everything, so,
And this was just giving an administrative thing that had not been followed
right.
even when it was in rules and is unnecessary. It doesn't really accomplish anything. I do believe that it might have existed because, and Councilmember Revelle, you worked with the mental health board a lot. At one point, the mental health board had, each member was a liaison to several agencies. And one of the issues was, you know, how do you make sure that favoritism doesn't come in and things like that? And I don't have any proof of that because, as I say, I just was there, but I could see how that could have been something that was developed for that committee or that board specifically for that.
Right, yeah, right. Okay, well then, would someone like to make a motion that we approve the amended rules and procedures for the Housing and Community Development Committee?
So move.
Second.
Okay, and I guess we're ready for a vote.
Chair Revelle,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Lauren Berlin,
Aye.
Kathy Feingold,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolami.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Great, thank you. And has anybody appeared in our audience to make any public comment?
Oh, and we have Lauren just raised her hand to.
I just have one last question. I feel like I'm talking a lot. I apologize. But how are you going to decide which gazebo gets funded?
Are they both in your ward, Councilmember Burns?
They are in his word.
Yeah. Probably work with the person that this came from. So again, this primarily came from Nicole Pinker, who works at a nonprofit that's in the basement, a STEM nonprofit in the basement of Family Focus. They were doing STEM programming outdoors all summer long for middle school students to try to help them adjust a bit better when they were entering into Haven. And so probably the gazebo that they were using, since they, initiated the request, which is further, I think it's in Butler Park, the Bexa Butler Park.
Based on my riding through in the summer on my way to work, I think it's Butler Park, but I wouldn't swear to that.
Okay, good.
Good question.
Marion, is there anybody?
We have one more person that joined since we announced the attendees. Rodney Orr has joined, but I don't have anybody that have raised their hand for public comment. If you're wishing to make some public comment, you can raise your hand right now. As mentioned before, we didn't have anybody sign up in advance. And as of now, they have not raised their hand. So no public comment for tonight.
Okay, well then I think we are ready to adjourn, and our next meeting is January 18th, 2022. So in the meantime, everybody have a lovely break and a happy holiday. And thank you all for the very robust and engaged conversation around the funding. I think that was really very, very helpful. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone. Happy
Thank
holidays.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.